In 1996, a promising criminal defense attorney vanished without a trace after her car was found near a bridge. The common belief was that she had committed suicide by jumping into the river. However, 7 years later, boys fishing by the riverbank discovered a briefcase submerged in the muddy soil. This unexpected find reignited the investigation into a case the city had almost forgotten. The Croyne River had calmed its turbulent flow after a week of incessant downpours. Yet, along its low banks, clinging to the water's edge, lay piles of various debris: broken branches, plastic bags, and fragments of shattered fences. 3 boys from Glen Hollow High School had skipped class, armed with worn fishing gear and anticipating a bountiful catch. Their unauthorized presence there only heightened the thrill and excitement. One of them, Kyle Bishop, noticed a dark, rectangular object partially submerged beneath a tangle of roots. He descended from the rocky outcrop and tried to dislodge it with the toe of his athletic shoe. The item remained motionless. "I think it's a briefcase," he said, squatting. "Nah." Dean, the oldest of the trio, mumbled skeptically. "Probably just trash." But it wasn't trash. When they managed to pull it out, its significant weight surprised them. The corners were heavily worn, and the clasps were rusted. One side was distorted, as if subjected to intense pressure. Kyle struggled to unfasten the latch. When the briefcase opened, they were first struck by a sharp odor. It was damp, earthy, with hints of mustiness, resembling a mix of mold and decaying paper. Inside were fragments of once white pages, stuck together, with blurred ink stains. Beneath this chaotic jumble, hidden in a frail, crumbling folder, lay a laminated identification card. Dean pulled it out and read aloud. "Evelyn Marks, attorney." The boys exchanged meaningful glances. The name Evelyn Marks meant nothing to them, but the profession certainly caught their attention. They carried the briefcase to the roadside and flagged down a passing patrol car. Officer Langston nodded approvingly, took the briefcase, glanced briefly at the ID, and placed it in the trunk. He might have dismissed the find had the name not surfaced in his professional memory. 2 hours later, the briefcase landed on a detective's desk in Hudson County. Detective Natalie Reyes had only been with the Hudson County Sheriff's Department for 6 weeks. Her previous assignment was in Albany with the Violent Crimes Unit. She wasn't particularly sentimental and hadn't sought out the Cold Case Division for personal transformation. However, there was a certain predictability in working cold cases that she found appealing. When the briefcase was delivered, it was logged as found property, dirty, damaged, with indeterminate contents. Reyes quickly reviewed the report. Her attention was drawn not to the decomposed contents, but rather to the attorney's identification card, which was well-preserved enough for identification. "Evelyn Marks," she murmured to herself, setting aside the printed document. She consulted the department's archives. The case number indicated its cold status, 96 to 1042. The archival records for the case were extremely concise. Missing person, female, 36, criminal defense attorney. Last seen June 19th, 1996. Car found parked on Bear Mountain Bridge. Doors unlocked. No signs of struggle. No suicide note. No confirmed witnesses. After a week of searching, authorities leaned towards a voluntary departure, possibly suicide. The family declined further contact with the press. The case was marked inactive by fall. Reyes leaned back in her chair. She carefully reread the summary twice. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then she typed a request to retrieve the physical file from deep storage. 2 hours later, it was in her hands. The next morning, Reyes attended the morning briefing, waiting for its conclusion to ask her question. "Does anyone here remember Evelyn Marks?" she inquired. Several people raised their eyebrows in surprise, but there was no immediate answer. Finally, Sergeant Halverson, the unit's most senior officer, thoughtfully rubbed his chin. "An attorney, right? She handled many highly questionable cases. Her car was found on the bridge. It was quite an unusual case." "Why was it closed?" Reyes asked. "The body was never found. No new leads. Was there an investigation into what cases she was working on?" Not to my knowledge. Do you believe it's worth reopening the investigation? Reyes didn't give a direct answer. She simply stood up, holding a printed photograph of the briefcase found by the river. How did her briefcase end up miles downstream from where her car was found? Halverson shrugged, showing indifference. Maybe it just fell. She didn't press the point, but the thought deeply settled in her mind. June 1996. Evelyn Marks stood in the courthouse rotunda, reviewing case materials. In one hand, she tightly clutched a stack of subpoenas. Her gaze rapidly scanned the lines, her lips pressed tightly in concentration. Her client, a teenager, had been unfairly accused, and she understood this perfectly. However, lately she had begun to notice inexplicable oddities. Requests for court motions disappeared without a trace. Phone calls went unanswered, and conversations ceased as soon as she entered a room. That evening, she locked her office earlier than usual. Colleagues noticed she looked tired but extremely focused. One secretary recalled her asking if the legal delivery service operated after 9 in the evening. No one inquired about the reason for her question. The next morning, her silver Volvo was found parked on the eastbound lane of Bear Mountain Bridge. The driver's door was slightly ajar. Her jacket rested on the front passenger seat. Neither a purse nor a cell phone was found. Search and rescue teams meticulously combed the river waters for 3 days. Her colleagues were deeply shaken. Her sister declined any interviews. Eventually, the city moved on with its usual life. Reyes left the police station that evening, clutching the folder under her arm. She wasn't one to jump to conclusions, but some cases carried a particular weight that clung to them, and this one felt nothing like a suicide. Natalie Reyes didn't have high hopes for the cold case archive, but even by outdated standards, Evelyn Marks' file was strikingly sparse. It was a brown folder, frayed at the edges, no thicker than a standard subpoena. Inside were a 3-page incident report, a 2-line summary of witness testimony, and a typed conclusion strongly recommending no further investigation. There were no interview forms, no forensic reports, no chronological records, and no follow-up notes. She re-examined the incident report. Evelyn's car had been found by a highway patrol officer around 6:45 a.m. It was parked just past the pedestrian walkway of Bear Mountain Bridge. The keys were still in the ignition. The doors remained unlocked. No purse, no cell phone. The car was towed and processed as an abandoned vehicle. No one had taken photos of the interior. One handwritten note in the margin, made by an unknown officer, read, "CIA envelope given to Yim possibly indicates wrongdoing." The envelope itself was not attached. Reyes meticulously checked the case cover twice. Nothing. She checked the case status form on the reverse side. Closed. September 4th, 1996. No signs of foul play. The initials belonged to a captain who had long since retired. Reyes closed the folder, slid it back into the archive box, and checked the inventory tag. It was marked inactive. She signed it out for review and took it to her desk. The evidence locker was located in the basement, a concrete vault packed with shelves of old cardboard boxes and rusted metal containers. Reyes moved slowly through the narrow aisle, past cases categorized by year, crime type, and city district. She reached the 1996 archive and found Evelyn's name on a worn white label. Inside was a single envelope. It contained Evelyn's Department of Motor Vehicles data, a faded photograph from her bar license application, and a list of pending cases at the time of her disappearance. There were no legal documents or handwritten notes, nothing that could shed light on her identity or the nature of her professional work. She returned the box to the shelf and made a note to request Evelyn's court records from the Judicial Archive instead. Then she headed to Evelyn's last listed next of kin. Laura Marks opened the door without the slightest smile. She was around 40, appearing younger than Reyes had expected. Her arms were crossed over her chest, even before she spoke her first word. "I knew this case would resurface someday," she said. "All it took was a briefcase floating down the river." Natalie introduced herself without formality, offered her business card, and waited for an invitation to enter, which did not come. After a prolonged pause, Laura opened the screen door and led her into a modestly furnished living room. Nothing in the house suggested Evelyn's presence. "I know what you're going to ask," Laura said, sitting on the edge of the sofa. "And the answer is no. She didn't commit suicide." Natalie didn't argue. She simply waited. She was extremely cautious, even obsessive. She even locked her office and kept duplicates of all documents. She wasn't one to give up easily. Laura paused, then added, "Especially when it came to her work." "Do you recall anything unusual around the time she disappeared?" Reyes asked. Laura stood and went to the hallway, returning with a small, taped shoebox. She handed it to Natalie. 2 days before she disappeared, a locksmith came to her house. He said the hinge on her evidence safe was damaged. She was very agitated. Laura continued her story, adding, "I asked her what happened, and she replied." Words came with obvious difficulty. "If anything happens to me, don't believe a word they say." Natalie nodded slowly, carefully imprinting that phrase in her memory. "Did she ever mention specific names, clients, or threats?" "No, she didn't talk about it. She said it would be safer if I didn't know." "Did she live alone?" "Yes, always." Reyes made a few more notes, expressed her gratitude, and rose to leave. Laura walked her to the door, but paused before opening it. "I never believed she jumped off that bridge. Please get justice for my sister. It's been too long." The next day, Natalie sat cross-legged in the municipal archive, surrounded by folders stacked in uneven piles. She had spent the last 2 hours reviewing Evelyn Marks' case log from her final year of professional activity in court. One folder lay apart from the others, noticeably thicker, with red ink notes along the edges. People versus Marcus Brandt. A 16-page summary detailed a 1996 robbery that culminated in the tragic death of off-duty Officer Glenn Turney. Marcus Brandt, a 17-year-old, was arrested that same night. He was reportedly found hiding 2 blocks from the liquor store, with blood on his hoodie and a discarded .38 caliber pistol found nearby in a trash can. The case seemed absolutely open and shut. However, Evelyn Marks took on the case pro bono, citing violations in the arrest protocol. She requested hearings to suppress evidence, filed motions questioning the chain of custody, and demanded disciplinary records for the officers. 3 days before jury selection was to begin, she vanished without a trace. The trial collapsed. Marcus pleaded guilty under pressure from a public defender. Natalie reread the arrest summary. 2 names were highlighted: Detective Ray Duca and Detective Carter Humes. She circled them, then checked the incident log for the same precinct, the 42nd for that year. These names appeared frequently, too frequently. Reyes headed north before dawn. Marcus Brandt was serving a 15-year sentence at Clinton Correctional Facility, located near the Canadian border. The prison's appearance was bleak and monotonous, dominated by square shapes. Each wing was designed more for containment than for providing a view. After passing through the gates, Natalie was led to a side room where inmates met non-attorney visitors under strict supervision. Marcus entered in a beige jumpsuit, his restrained expression revealing no emotion. He was about 25, with a lean build. He sat opposite her without speaking. A correctional officer nodded and stepped aside. "I'm Detective Reyes," Natalie said. "I'm reopening Evelyn Marks' disappearance case." Marcus's gaze shifted. He leaned back in his chair, studying her intently. "Are you serious?" he asked after a moment. "Yes." He exhaled through his nose. "No one's spoken that name to me in 10 years. I wanted to talk to you about the last time you saw her." He hesitated. She said she had something very important. A week before the trial, maybe 4 or 5 days before jury selection. Natalie pulled out a small notepad. "What did she say?" Marcus tapped his finger on the table. "She said the case was rotten, that it wasn't just me, that she was working on something much bigger, and if she could expose it, she'd take them down with her." "Did she say who they were?" He shrugged. "No, but she said it was cops. More than one." Natalie paused. "Did you believe her?" "There wasn't much left for me to believe in back then," he said. "But yes, I did believe her." Marcus leaned forward slightly. "She was the only person who looked me straight in the eye and didn't see a gang kid or a waste of court time." The correctional officer reappeared in the doorway. 2 more minutes. Natalie nodded. "Do you remember anything else? Anything unusual about her behavior?" No, that was the last time I saw her. I heard what happened afterward. They probably got to her before she could act. Marcus lightly tapped his fist on the table as she turned to leave. She deserved better than a newspaper headline and a closed case. Back at her desk, Natalie carefully reviewed the Clinton Correctional Facility's visitor logs for the week Marcus mentioned. There were no records of Evelyn Marks. Surveillance camera footage from that year had not been preserved. She requested confirmation from the prison administration anyway, but already anticipated their response. No records, no visits, no oversight. The absence of information spoke louder than any paper trail. Next, she retrieved the original court transcripts for the People versus Brandt case. Evelyn's motions to suppress evidence were mentioned, but not attached to the file. The hearing never took place. After Evelyn's disappearance, Marcus agreed to a plea bargain to avoid a potential life sentence. Natalie quickly reviewed the court order closing the case. The judge noted Evelyn's absence, but did not inquire why her files were missing. No request for postponement had been filed. The case simply proceeded without her involvement. Natalie leaned back in her chair. Something was clearly wrong. She returned to the court transcript and reread the testimony. The arresting officer, Detective Duca, claimed Marcus was apprehended after a tip from a neighborhood witness. The witness's name was never disclosed. The tip sheet was not attached. The second officer, Humes, provided minimal additional details. Natalie opened another folder, People versus Donnelly, 1995. Another defendant, the same detectives. The arrest description was almost identical. Witness report. Chase. Weapon found in alley dumpster. She checked the People versus Jeremy case, also from 1995. Again, Duca. Humes. A similar description. Natalie closed the files and locked them in her cabinet. She had enough information to start unraveling the threads, but it was still unclear how many people held that rope and how far they were willing to go to keep it from falling apart. Natalie Reyes completed a request for IIA records by noon. This was standard procedure. 3 copies. One for her personal file, one for internal review, and another that would most likely vanish without a trace somewhere in a police department drawer. She didn't hold her breath for a quick result. She handed the folder to the public relations officer, a weary man who barely looked up. "These are classified materials," he said. "You'll need the proper clearance. I'm not asking for them to be published. I just want to review the chain of complaints filed against Detectives Duca and Humes between 1995 and 1997. "That could take weeks," he replied, already moving the file to a pending basket. "Let me know if anything suddenly changes." She left without waiting for a reply. Reyes had worked in many departments and understood perfectly that weeks in this context meant not bureaucratic delay, but deliberate evasion. Returning to her temporary rental apartment, an old one-room studio above a closed photography studio, she tossed her keys onto the counter and opened her laptop. Her inbox was empty. No updates from ballistics, no replies from the original court clerks, and nothing from the district attorney's office regarding Brandt's motions. She hadn't expected any movement. She checked the mailbox outside, more out of habit than hope. Inside, among junk mail and an oil change reminder addressed to the previous tenant, lay a plain matte envelope. No return address, no postmark. She opened it on the counter. A single photograph slipped out. The grainy image, clearly a still from an old surveillance camera, showed Evelyn Marks standing in a courthouse hallway. She faced a female clerk in uniform, aged 30 to 35, with an olive complexion and hair pulled back in a tight bun. On the back of the photo, written in blue ink, were the words, "Torres, 42nd Precinct." Natalie cross-referenced the precinct's internal staff logs for 1996. Only one match was found. Alina Taz, a civilian employee who left the department in early 1997. No forwarding address. No employment history under that name since. After 2 hours of searching Department of Motor Vehicles records, nursing databases, and tracking a minor name change request filed in Alter County, Natalie found a match, Alina Marquez. The address led to a small assisted living facility near Binghamton. Natalie drove there the next day, not displaying her badge. The home was quiet, with few staff. She signed in under the pretense of inquiring about a relative. After a few questions, she found Alina in a back corner lounge, folding towels next to a woman in a wheelchair. Alina looked older than in the photo, thinner and more cautious. Natalie approached slowly. "Ms. Marquez, I'm not here to cause trouble. I just need a few minutes of your time." Alina looked up, already wary. "I'm not who you think I am. You worked at the 42nd Precinct. You knew Evelyn Marks." The towel slipped from Alina's hands. She didn't answer. Natalie reached into her coat and pulled out the photograph. Alina stared at it, then quietly said, "You shouldn't have come here. I'm investigating Evelyn's disappearance." "Your name came up," Natalie said. She scared them. Alina said, "It's true. A few days before she disappeared, I remember her coming in with that envelope." "What was in it?" "I don't know. She didn't say. She just asked where the commander's mailbox was. Said she needed to make sure it got into the right hands." "Did it?" "No. That envelope never showed up anywhere. I asked the clerk the next day, and they said no such complaint was logged." Natalie waited. Alina took a deep breath. "The night before she disappeared, I was walking past the break room. I heard Dukas say, 'If she's meant to go, she's meant to go.'" Humes laughed. "I didn't stop." Natalie closed the files and locked them in her cabinet. She had enough information to start unraveling the threads, but it remained unclear how many people held that rope and how far they were willing to go to keep it from falling apart. Natalie Reyes submitted a request for IIA records by noon. This was standard procedure. 3 copies. One for her personal file, one for internal review, and another that would most likely vanish somewhere in a police department drawer. She didn't hold her breath for a quick result. She handed the folder to the public relations officer, a weary man who barely looked up. "These are classified materials," he said. "You'll need the proper clearance. I'm not asking for them to be published. I just want to review the chain of complaints filed against Detectives Duca and Humes between 1995 and 1997. "That could take weeks," he replied, already moving the file to a pending basket. "Let me know if anything suddenly changes." She left without waiting for a reply. Reyes had worked in many departments and understood perfectly that weeks in this context meant not bureaucratic delay, but deliberate evasion. Returning to her temporary rental apartment, an old one-room studio above a closed photography studio, she tossed her keys onto the counter and opened her laptop. Her inbox was empty. No updates from ballistics, no replies from the original court clerks, and nothing from the district attorney's office regarding Brandt's motions. She hadn't expected any movement. She checked the mailbox outside, more out of habit than hope. Inside, among junk mail and an oil change reminder addressed to the previous tenant, lay a plain matte envelope. No return address, no postmark. She opened it on the counter. A single photograph slipped out. The grainy image, clearly a still from an old surveillance camera, showed Evelyn Marks standing in a courthouse hallway. She stood facing a female clerk in uniform, aged 30 to 35, with an olive complexion and hair pulled back in a tight bun. On the back of the photo, written in blue ink, were the words, "Torres, 42nd Precinct." Natalie cross-referenced the precinct's internal staff logs for 1996. Only one match was found. Alina Tawes, a civilian employee who left the department in early 1997. No forwarding address. No employment history under that name since. After 2 hours of searching Department of Motor Vehicles records, nursing databases, and tracking a minor name change request filed in Alter County, Natalie found a match: Alina Marquez. The address led to a small assisted living facility near Binghamton. Natalie drove there the next day, not displaying her badge. The home was quiet, with few staff. She signed in under the pretense of inquiring about a relative. After a few questions, she found Alina in a back corner lounge, folding towels next to a woman in a wheelchair. Alina looked older than in the photo, thinner and more cautious. Natalie approached slowly. "Ms. Marquez, I'm not here to cause trouble. I just need a few minutes of your time." Alina looked up, already wary. "I'm not who you think I am. You worked at the 42nd Precinct. You knew Evelyn Marks." The towel slipped from Alina's hands. She didn't answer. Natalie reached into her coat and pulled out the photograph. Alina stared at it, then quietly said, "You shouldn't have come here. I'm investigating Evelyn's disappearance." "Your name came up," Natalie said. She scared them. Alina said, "It's true. A few days before she disappeared, I remember her coming in with that envelope." "What was in it?" "I don't know. She didn't say. She just asked where the commander's mailbox was. Said she needed to make sure it got into the right hands." "Did it?" "No. That envelope never showed up anywhere. I asked the clerk the next day, and they said no such complaint was logged." Natalie waited. Alina took a deep breath. "The night before she disappeared, I was walking past the break room. I heard Dukas say, 'If she's meant to go, she's meant to go.'" Humes laughed. "I didn't stop. Did you report it?" "I transferred the next week, resigned, changed my name. I didn't wait for my turn." "Do you remember the name Louis Roas?" Alina's expression tightened. "He was in custody. I remember that name because it came over the radio twice. Evelyn said he was helping her, some kind of informant. He disappeared 2 days before her. Just gone. No transfer records, no discharge papers, nothing." "Do you think it's connected?" "I think everything is connected." Natalie didn't immediately return to her rental apartment. She stopped at a gas station, filled her tank, then parked at a roadside diner and spent 2 hours reviewing her notes. Names, dates, motions, disappearances. When she finally pulled into the parking lot behind her home, she knew something was wrong before she even got out of the car. The front passenger tire was half flat. The rear was completely flat, not punctured by nails, but cut cleanly and precisely. Natalie crouched down and checked the treads, both front and rear on the right side. She didn't need a forensics kit to know what it meant. Someone had been close enough to send a message. Natalie didn't sleep. By morning, her full attention had shifted back to the briefcase. It was no longer just a found item. It was a crime scene. She called the Regional Forensics Lab in Poughkeepsie and requested a secondary forensic examination, this time on an expedited basis. The technician on the phone hesitated. Protocol dictated repeating an analysis only by special request from the lead detective or district attorney. But when Natalie used the phrase, "possible officer-involved homicide," things moved faster. 3 hours later, she stood in the chilled lab, arms crossed, as a pair of forensic technicians worked under focused lighting. "It's heavily damaged," one of them said, slowly turning the briefcase on a soft tray. "But we can still try to swab the internal seams and zippers. Sometimes particles get caught under the metal teeth." They used fine brushes and protein markers, carefully collecting any residue they could. It took hours. Then the second technician, younger, called from across the room, "You'll want to see this." They had found a tiny but persistent trace of dried epithelial cells between the zipper folds, cells with intact nuclei. Enough for a viable DNA profile. It took another day to run the comparison. Natalie sat in her car outside the lab, staring at the windshield until the call came. The match was undeniable. Carter Humes. She drove to Albany before the ink on the lab report had dried. Carter Humes lived in a nondescript duplex tucked behind a defunct laundromat in a kind of neighborhood where houses looked occupied but rarely showed signs of life. She waited outside until the porch light came on, then got out and knocked on the door. Humes answered after half a minute, unshaven, in jeans and a thermal shirt, his eyes sliding past her before settling on her badge. "Detective Reyes," she introduced herself, holding it steady. "I'd like to ask you a few questions about Evelyn Marks." He didn't move. "That case is 12 years old." "I know, which is why it's surprising your DNA turned up on her briefcase." His expression didn't change, but he stepped back without objection, inviting her in. The living room was sparse. No photos, no clutter, just a chair and a dusty bookshelf untouched for years. Hume sat, leaning forward, resting on his knees. "Look," he said, "I don't know what you think you found." The lab confirmed a match. "We found trace DNA, your skin, embedded in the zipper seam." He slowly shook his head, as if buying time. Natalie remained standing. "That briefcase was found last month in the Croyne River. You were never involved in the original case, never questioned, but Evelyn's sister said she carried that briefcase with her constantly. So how did your DNA get on it?" He looked at the floor, then back up. Something in his eyes gave him away. I didn't kill her. Then help me understand what happened. A long pause followed. Then he stood and walked to the window, crossing his arms. It wasn't supposed to go this far, he said. Ray just wanted to scare her. She was making noise, talking about IIA complaints. Said she had proof. You confronted her. I waited for her in the parking lot that night. I told her to back off. She wouldn't. I knocked her out, shoved her in her car, and drove off. His voice was now a flat, quiet narrative. But she woke up when we got to the bridge. Things got really bad. She tried to run, so I had to stop. She hit me with the briefcase, got me in the jaw. I grabbed it and threw it. It fell into the river. Natalie remained silent. And then I called Ray, told him things got out of hand. He told me to bring her to him. She was still alive when I left her with him. That was the last time I saw her. Where? Humes hesitated. There's a place, an old drug dealer's cabin on the north edge of the training woods. Not on maps. Ray used it sometimes. Said it was clean, quiet. Natalie pulled out her notepad. Address? No address. Just off Route 301, half a mile east of the old Ranger Trail. You'll need dogs. She closed her notepad. You're under arrest. Humes. For obstruction of justice, accessory to murder, and failure to report a crime. To her surprise, he didn't resist. He simply nodded and allowed her to cuff him. He was transported to the regional holding facility that night. It was quiet, no press, no leaks. Natalie notified the district attorney's office and requested a full forensic team to search the cabin. The next morning, she returned to her rental apartment and updated her notes until almost 2 a.m. At 7:14 a.m., her phone rang. It was the desk sergeant from Albany. Humes is dead. She sat upright. Ow! Found hanging in his cell, ripped sheet tied to a vent grate. Suicide. That's what they're calling it. Was he put in isolation? Yes. Are any of the duty officers connected to the 42nd precinct? The line went silent. She hung up. The window opposite reflected her face, calm but tense. Everything Humes hadn't said died with him. Natalie stood at the edge of the clearing as the warrant team cut through the overgrowth with machetes and bolt cutters. The trail from Route 301 had become almost invisible from disuse. Her boots sank into the soft moss, each step weighted by Humes's last words. The cabin appeared like a scar in the woods, leaning, weathered, half consumed by foliage. She slowly circled it, surveying the area. Duca hadn't chosen this spot by chance. It was forgotten, quiet. The K-9 handler clipped a leash to his German shepherd and gave command. The dog darted around the perimeter, nose pressed to the ground. Another team began photographing the site and sketching its layout. Natalie kept her distance, surveying the perimeter from a higher vantage point near the tree line. She knew they might find nothing. Years had passed. Bones could be scattered, weathered. Soil and time did not easily preserve the truth. But something inside told her Evelyn was here. It was almost dusk when the first signal came. The dog tensed and began barking sharply, tail stiff, nose fixed on a spot halfway down the slope behind the cabin. The handler knelt to mark the location, calling for the recovery team. Natalie descended, her boots sliding slightly in the mud. The slope, covered in loose earth, was hidden by natural vegetation, ferns, dry brush, fallen pine branches. But the dog had smelled something. They began excavating carefully. A perimeter was marked, and soil was removed layer by layer with trowels and brushes. 2 hours passed before one of the technicians stood up and quietly said, "We have fabric." Natalie moved to the edge of the excavation. A dull burgundy scrap, clinging to decomposed fabric fragments, showed through the earth. Nearby, fragile bones, a femur, then ribs. They worked in silence until the remains were fully uncovered. It was a female skeleton, wrapped in a torn trench coat, partially mummified by the soil. Natalie looked at the coat's color, a deep wine red. Laura had mentioned Evelyn wore it the day she disappeared. A cracked wristwatch was also found. Both items were bagged for cataloging. At the regional lab, the remains underwent a full examination. The fractures were consistent with an assault, not an accident. The medical examiner, Dr. Ellman, confirmed Natalie's suspicions. She fought back. There are defensive fractures on the ulna, and we found epithelial tissue under her fingernails. Viable enough to profile, the doctor added. We're expediting the results. By the time the DNA report landed on her desk, Natalie Reyes already knew what it would say. The skin fragments extracted from under Evelyn Marks' fingernails matched the DNA of Detective Ray Duca. The forensic confirmation brought no elation. It merely narrowed the field. After reading the report, she stood in the lab hallway for a long time, jaw clenched, eyes unfocused. Back at the precinct, she typed out a warrant application with methodical precision. She included an additional request for a sealed indictment, unwilling for the information to leak before she was ready. The district attorney signed it without hesitation, having seen enough. Natalie assembled her task force, just 5 people, all carefully selected. It included 2 internal affairs agents she trusted, a federal marshal, a forensic analyst, and a seasoned officer from her previous posting in Syracuse. They met in the back conference room at 7:30 p.m., the doors locked. We get one shot at this, Natalie stated. Duca knows the system inside and out. He's used it to maintain his pristine record, but his hands aren't clean anymore. She detailed the apprehension plan, its key aspects, and potential risks. No press, no leaks. When we move silently. However, the next morning, before the task force could even deploy, Duca vanished without a trace. When Natalie received the alert, she was already en route to a briefing with the marshals. A detective from the 1st Precinct personally contacted her, reporting that Duca had been seen leaving his home, and he wasn't alone. Who exactly? Natalie pressed. 2 men, the detective replied. One's a retired narcotics officer. The other was suspended last year for an excessive force complaint. We've identified them both, Eric Ball and Vince Raw. Both names had already appeared in internal affairs reports in connection with evidence tampering, unauthorized surveillance, and acts of intimidation. Natalie demanded, send the footage immediately. I need the exact time, direction of travel, and vehicle license plates. Natalie watched the video 3 times before speaking. Duca appeared completely calm, and the men accompanying him acted without haste. The SUV left his driveway just after dawn, heading north. She immediately issued an alert. By noon, U.S. Marshals had joined the investigation, and border crossings were discreetly notified. It wasn't a full-scale manhunt yet, but it was as close as it could get. The SUV was flagged by an LPR scanner 3 hours later, south of Plattsburgh. Natalie was already airborne by then. She landed in Burlington and was quickly transported across the border zone to coordinate with the local interception team. The alert worked flawlessly. A customs officer recognized the license plates at a secondary checkpoint and immediately reported it. The SUV was stopped just 20 meters from the Canadian border in a wooded parking area off Highway 9. Natalie and the marshals approached with extreme caution, weapons drawn but not raised. 2 officers stepped out first, hands open, and gave the command, "Get out of the vehicle, Ray." Several tense seconds passed, but eventually, Duca emerged. His jacket was tightly zipped, his expression unreadable. "You really put on a show," he muttered. "It's over." There was no resistance, no outburst of aggression. Duca was handcuffed and placed in the back seat of the lead vehicle. The other 2 men were taken into custody without incident. Natalie didn't speak another word until they were on the highway, heading back to the city. She turned slightly in her seat to look at him. "We found her," Natalie said. Duca didn't blink, his reply devoid of emotion. "I figured you would." The drive back was long, but far from silent. Natalie methodically flipped through the contents of an additional folder on her lap. Copies of Evelyn's tape transcript, the official forensic report, and a detailed log of Duca's previous misconduct allegations. She wasn't sure if he noticed, but she deliberately laid out the documents 1 page at a time, allowing him to see them. Duca stirred only once, asking, "Do you think this will be a win for you?" Natalie didn't answer, and the car continued its journey. The moment they arrived at the precinct, Duca was immediately taken for questioning, and the steel door closed behind Natalie Reyes, marking the beginning of a new phase. Duca was already seated, handcuffed, displaying a surprising calm, as if awaiting a dental appointment rather than a murder charge. He barely glanced at her as she pulled a chair opposite him and sat down, silently placing her folder on the table. "So," Duca said, leaning back, "this is the part where you try to scare me with something you think you know." Natalie studied him intently for a moment. "No, this is the part where I show you what we've proven." He scoffed, clearly unimpressed. "You've got nothing. A dead woman's voice and a bag of mold. It's all just speculation." Natalie didn't reply. She reached into her file folder and pulled out a small cassette recorder. The device's casing had been meticulously cleaned, the tape inside rewound and copied. She pressed play. The voice that filled the room was faint, with static, but unmistakably recognizable. Duca, Humes, threats from informants, Rojas, fabricated testimony. If I disappear, it was them. Duca's eyes darted to the recorder. For a fraction of a second, his composure wavered, but it quickly returned, even more hardened. "That's your smoking gun? You think some half-heard whisper from a paranoid lawyer will stand up?" Natalie opened the folder on the table and slowly slid a page towards him. "It's not just her voice anymore," she said. Duca didn't touch the page. He just stared intently at it. "We found this at her sister's house," Natalie continued. Evelyn left a note saying she kept a second copy in case anything happened. The note was dated 2 weeks before her disappearance. She slowly laid out the contents: a second cassette tape, a typed and personally signed affidavit, copies of the fabricated witness testimonies used in Marcus Brandt's trial, and finally, a list of names, officers, superiors, even a prosecutor's office employee, all linked to cases showing a clear pattern of evidence tampering or coerced testimony. Natalie maintained an even voice. "You fabricated the testimony that placed Marcus Brandt at the crime scene. The murdered officer, Officer Quinn, threatened to go to internal affairs about you. Evelyn found out. That's why you silenced her." Duca's jaw tightened, his smirk gone. "Natalie didn't blink. She named you on tape, on paper, before witnesses. She told your story before you could bury it. You just didn't dig deep enough." He stared at the table, remaining motionless. "We've already handed all the materials over to the district attorney's office. A grand jury is being convened. You're being charged with murder, obstruction of justice, conspiracy to tamper with evidence, and destruction of protected materials." 2 uniformed officers entered the room at a signal. One approached Duca from behind and unclipped his handcuffs from the table. The other stepped forward and secured his wrists behind his back. Duca said nothing. His eyes remained fixed on the folder, but something in his posture shifted, tensed. The officers let him out. Natalie remained alone in the room, her hands resting on the edge of the table. She looked at the recorder, which still lay in the center, as if waiting to be heard all this time. The district attorney's press conference room was packed. Natalie stood to the side of the podium, arms crossed, the weight of everything she had uncovered pressing on her shoulders. District Attorney Miriam Gold took the microphone. Her voice was calm, yet undeniably firm. "A grand jury has returned indictments in the case of Evelyn Marks, an attorney who disappeared in 1996 under circumstances we now understand to be murder and obstruction of justice." A quiet murmur swept through the room. "Raymond Duca has been charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy to obstruct justice, and destruction of evidence. Carter Humes, now deceased, has been posthumously named an accomplice in obstruction of justice and accessory to murder. 3 additional former officers, Vince Ruaw, Eric Ball, and Joan Frisk, were indicted for their roles in wrongful convictions involving evidence tampering and coerced testimony." Natalie maintained a composed expression, but felt the press glancing her way. When Gold gestured for her to step forward, she slowly approached the microphone. Evelyn Marks was an attorney, a sister, and a tireless advocate for her clients, Natalie said. She risked everything to speak truth to power. Her voice was silenced, but her evidence remained, and it was her voice on tape that reopened the door. She paused, looking out of the crowd. Justice came too late. At the upstate correctional facility, which had seen too many broken lives, Marcus Brandt stood in his cell, staring at the clock above the guard post. He had long stopped counting the years, but he hadn't stopped waiting. The metal door grated open, and a guard signaled, "Pack up. You're being released." Marcus didn't move at first. "For what?" "Conviction overturned," the guard replied. "New evidence found. You're exonerated." When he stepped outside an hour later, the sun touched his face like an unfamiliar warmth. He didn't smile, didn't run, just lifted his head, blinking at the bright light. Natalie waited at the gates. She extended a small manila envelope. "Bus fare, a prepaid phone, a hotel room for the night. There's a legal aid group that wants to help you get settled." He slowly nodded, the envelope still in her hand. "She believed me," he finally said. "All this time, I thought maybe she gave up." "No," Natalie said, "and neither did you." The cemetery was located on a quiet hillside, just beyond the edge of town. The grounds were well-maintained, rows of identical stones symmetrically arranged, but one stood out, newly placed, its granite still gleaming brightly under the morning sky. It bore the name, Evelyn Marks. Natalie Reyes stood a few steps behind, her coat collar raised against the wind. Beside her stood Marcus Brandt and Laura Marks. A bouquet of white lilies lay at the base of the headstone, left by someone earlier. Laura carried a single rose. They approached in silence. Marcus stepped forward first. He knelt and placed a rose on the stone. "Thank you for giving me my life back, for standing up for me," he said in a low voice. He slowly stood, wiping an eye. Laura followed. Her hand trembled slightly as she touched the engraved letters. "You won, Evie. Rest in peace," she whispered. Natalie remained still, her gaze fixed on the name carved into the stone. She paused, pulling a folded envelope from her coat pocket. It was a photocopy of Evelyn's original internal affairs complaint, the one they had found buried beneath layers of silence and time. She looked at the paper, then at the grave. "You fought the good fight," Natalie said. "We heard you. Justice has been served." She carefully placed the photocopy under the headstone, right at the edge of the burial site. The document, of course, wouldn't withstand the elements for long, but that wasn't its purpose. It was a symbolic act, marking the conclusion of a long and painful cycle. Marcus and Laura patiently waited for her by the path leading from the resting place. Natalie joined them, sharing the moment of farewell. As they slowly descended the slope, leaving Evelyn behind forever, a profound silence enveloped them. There was nothing more to prove, nothing more to uncover. Only the stark truth, so fiercely fought for, and the enduring memory of a woman who never stopped fighting.